Mr. Secretary, give us your sense of the U.S. economy right now. How strong is it? Where do you see weaknesses?
Well, parts of the economy have continued to be quite strong. And obviously, we're seeing inflation still being very sticky. So, the market has moved towards less rate cuts this year. I do think we're going to continue to see a slowdown of the U.S. economy at these levels of interest rates.
So you obviously worked for President Trump. President Biden's a different man, different economic policy. Is there anything you see in the Biden economic policy that you approve of, you think they've done a good job with?
Look, I think there's certain things that they've done that have been okay, but I think there's been a very different economic agenda. And prior to COVID, we saw the Trump tax cuts were really working. I think to the extent that we hadn't had COVID, we were seeing an increase in the economy and the cuts would have paid for themselves. And we were seeing very robust economic activity. Now, obviously in COVID, we had to spend a lot of money. I think had we not spent the first $2 trillion, we would have had a worldwide depression, not recession. But I think in hindsight, we went on to spend too much money. And I think when the Biden administration came in, they continued to spend too much money. And I think these deficits are going to come back and be a real problem.
Well, what about the deficits? Because there's a lot of talk about the deficit. I'm not sure that either of the candidates, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, is making a big deal out of cutting the deficit. But what can be done, what should be done to actually improve the situation of the debt and the deficit?
Well, obviously, it's a very difficult political issue. I don't expect that either one of them are going to talk about this before the election. I do hope whoever is the next president, and if it's President Trump, that he does address the deficit. I think there are entitlement issues that need to be dealt with. The Social Security Trust Fund is going to run out of money, and we need to address that. And we need to start addressing that now. People have relied upon Social Security, and the current beneficiaries should be assured that they will continue to get Social Security, but we need to deal with this on an ongoing basis for future generations.
We have a very strong U.S. dollar. Is that a good thing for the economy?
I think it is a good thing. I mean, for one, the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and that's allowed us to finance these very large deficits. But over time, this is something we can't be reliant upon. I think the dollar will continue to be the reserve currency for the foreseeable future, but we have a responsibility to get our financial situation back in shape.
Can that be done other than through some sort of a presidential commission, a commission that would look at the way we've done, for example, with base closings or Social Security in the past?
I think it has to be done on a bipartisan basis. It's going to obviously have to be something that goes through the House and the Senate, and this needs to have the leadership of the president. But yes, my recommendation would be to establish a bipartisan commission and start reviewing this now.
One of the issues that's pending right now are the Russian assets, central bank assets that have been seized in Europe and in the United States. What should be done, if anything, with those? Do you have a view about whether we actually should be taking those assets and basically giving them to Ukraine for rebuilding Ukraine because of the war?
Well, first of all, I think the sanctions programs are very important, and it's a major foreign policy tool that the U.S. has. And I've always said, because we are the reserve currency, we need to be careful about how we use it. So the first part of this is making sure we put in place sanctions and we enforce them. I'm very concerned that the Russian oil sanctions and the Iran oil sanctions are not being enforced. We're seeing flagrant violations of those, and I think that has to be enforced. Now, in regards to what you do with the money needs to go through either a legal process or a legislative process. And I think there should be a healthy debate. But I think using the Russian money to rebuild Ukraine after the war is something should be seriously considered.
Since you left the government, one of the big moves you made was the New York Community Bank, buying it. Give us your sense of why that was a good move. There's a lot of concern about regional banks right now, although you know regional banks personally pretty well.
Well, I've been in the banking business for a long time. During the financial crisis, I bought 3 banks from the FDIC. We created the largest bank actually headquartered here in Southern California, One West. I've known New York Community Bank for the last 10 years. This was a merger of 3 institutions, and in them coming together, they didn't have the proper procedures for a $100 billion bank. They ran into some issues with real estate. So we raised over $1 billion of capital. A very large portion of that will be to build robust reserves. And we've come out with a 3-year plan to restore profitability to the bank. And by the end of 2026, the management team will deliver on a plan that gets the bank to an 11 to 12% return on tangible common equity and 11 to 12% CET1 to make it a well-capitalized bank.
Have you learned anything about New York Community Bank since you actually have bought it? I mean, either on the upside or the downside, has anything surprised you?
Well, of course, you always learned a lot more now that we've been in there for the last 2 months. The good news is we put in Joseph Otting as the CEO. Joseph had been CEO of One West and had been controller of the currency. So he's extremely well qualified for something like this. He's just been a magnet for talent. So he's brought in a new management team, new CFO, new legal counsel, new head of credit, new head of real estate. There's some very good people that were at New York Community Bank that will stay and be part of this team. But we now have a turnaround situation that this management team will rebuild this bank.
You've been involved in the Gulf a fair amount, including with Saudi Arabia. Obviously, there's a big turmoil going on there with Gaza. But give us your sense about economic relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia, which have become more integral, actually, as so much investment's going to Saudi Arabia. Are they affected, do you think, at this point, by what's going on in Gaza?
Well, I would just say in general, I'm very pleased with the relationships that have been developed both under the Trump administration, now continued under the Biden administration in certain areas of the Mideast. So obviously the Abraham Accords was very critical to the region. I think what the Crown Prince has done in Saudi Arabia and the way he's trying to move forward the country is pretty remarkable in rebuilding. He has a large population. He's trying to create great opportunities for the youth. And the fact that Saudi is talking about establishing relationships with Israel, establishing a defense pact with the United States, these are very, very encouraging things for the region and for the world.
What are the opportunities, as you see it, for U.S. investors in Saudi Arabia?
I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for U.S. investors to invest in the Mideast. It's not something we're focused on. We're really focused on the U.S. economy and the global markets. But I think as you rebuild these economies, there will be great opportunities for a lot of investors in these countries.
One of the things you've expressed interest is in Tik Tok, or buying it from ByteDance. We now have legislation that within a year, as I understand, less than a year now, that unless they do something different, they're going to have to sell it. Are you still interested in Tik Tok, and are you putting together the financing to get that deal done?
Well, I'm still very interested in buying it, and to the extent they want to sell it or spin it off, we very much want to pursue that. I support that Congress passed the bill and it's now been signed into law. I will say this has had just incredible, overwhelming support with Republicans and Democrats. This may be the only thing that everybody agrees on. The fact that it's on 160 million phones, I do think it's a security issue in the U.S., and I'm glad that I see it's being addressed.
One of the big issues is the algorithm, right? This is very powerful for TikTok. Does the deal still work if the algorithm doesn't come with TikTok?
Well, the Chinese government has been very clear that they won't give an export license on the algorithm, and I understand that. We have sensitive technology that we don't want to transfer to them, and they don't want to transfer this to the U.S. I've actually spoken to a lot of tech companies on working about rebuilding this. I do believe the algorithms could be rebuilt. So my plan, if we were to purchase it, would be to rebuild the technology under U.S. leadership, make sure that it's all disconnected from ByteDance going forward, and that it is very robust and secure.
I understand. At one point you suggest you might talk to the former President Trump about this possibility. Do you have a sense of where he is on this deal?
I haven't spoken to him since the law has been passed on this. I've spoken to him on other issues. But, this started under his leadership. So I'm sure he understands the national security issues. And it was under his leadership that this really started.
So you are very active now as a banker, investment banker, private equity investor. Where are you looking for opportunities? Now we have New York Community Bank, we have maybe TikTok. You seem to be quite different entities. What is your theory of the case?
So we have 3 areas that we focus on, which are areas that we have a lot of expertise. The first is technology with a big focus on national security and cyber. along with myself. General Dunford, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is one of our partners. We also have the person who ran the cyber task force for the government. The second area is fintech and financials. Again, my general counsel was general counsel at Treasury and understands all the regulatory issues. I've obviously been around banking for 40 years. And the last area is entertainment and content, where, in my previous life, I made a lot of entertainment investments. And we're a big believer in what we call new content, and TikTok fits right in with that.
Boy, you talk about a lot of turmoil. The entertainment industry, there's a lot of turmoil in media. We see it everywhere we look right now, including with Paramount most recently. But my old shop, Disney, has had some difficulties. There's a lot of challenges. Warner Brothers Discovery as well. What do you make of that? What is the future for the media entertainment business as you see it?
I think to the extent these companies can execute properly, there are very, very good opportunities, particularly given how low some of the values are on traditional media. I don't think the traditional media is going to go away overnight, but there's no question there's a complete transition in the market from the way when we grew up, from network TV to streaming, and not just streaming, to short form video and long form video that we see on TikTok, we see on Instagram, we see on YouTube. So there is a whole new distribution model. Having said that, great content has a lot of value. And a lot of these media companies have an enormous library of great content that can be mined. So I think distribution is a very important issue, that there needs to be a transition.